Short-term mission really has been a successful thing in this church. Back in the years 2006 through 2011, we actually had it as a plank of our strategic plan that we would send 150 people every year out into short-term mission. And by God's grace, we were able to achieve that during those years. There were at least 150 going out each year. I remember meeting with our youth leaders, not this iteration, but a few back, and around the room they said, we just feel that missions is really the most important aspect of all that we do with the youth here. It makes the most lasting impact. And it's been wonderful even in the last year with Tom and Kara and Ryan and Dan to really see this revival of interest and involvement in missions. And I'm very, very excited about all the young people who are going out this year. Our strategic partnership with Rwanda, we had an event just recently celebrating that it had been 10 years, 18 teams, 254 people that have been able to labor effectively there, and the ministry has grown by leaps and bounds over those years. I would like to see if everyone here who has been on a short-term mission, not here necessarily at this church, but you've been on a short-term mission trip, or you're going on one, so Diana, you can raise your hand finally. If you've gone or are going this year, would you raise your hand? Sunday night, you're always preaching to the choir. So many of you, and I'm sure it's had a wonderful impact on your life. We do a lot of short-term mission, but celebrating short-term mission does not mean that we shortcut or undermine the importance of long-term missions as well. I was with a pastor recently of a fairly large church, and he says we have a very strong commitment to short-term mission. But it's probably been 6 or 7 years since we sent anybody out from this church on a longer term. Long-term workers, they really remain the most strategic plank in missions. It's always better when the gospel can be shared in a person's heart language and with the cultural sensitivities that go with different parts of the world. And those are not the long suits for short-term teams. But we've been very happy to begin support for the Butterfields, who have been here for many years and now as a third career are going to devote their lives to vocational ministry among the military in the Hampton Roads and Williamsburg, Norfolk area. Jonathan, a young man who is a trained pilot going out to a very difficult region of the world to give his life flying airplanes off of mountains. Sometimes the runways are like this, and he says, well, those can be shorter because then when you fall out of the sky, you got a little bit more room to catch yourself. We need to pray for Jonathan. We're going to be meeting here in just a couple of weeks, a wonderful family, the Scambattis, through our consortium. They're out at Reston Bible Church. But they've been sending people for 22 years and finally said, we really feel that God is leading us to go, taking their family and going to a very, very difficult region of the world where there are no believers. So the long-term work remains a very, very essential part. We're still excited about that. And most long-termers can also point back to a time where they also participated on a short-term trip, and maybe they caught this missions bug, I don't know, by doing that. But God uses the short-term trips as well to prepare people for the long term. I want to look at a passage with you all tonight. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1. And I will read beginning in verse 8. We're going to look at the passage down to verse 15, but I'll read a couple more verses down to verse 17 as we read here. Romans chapter 1, verse 8. Paul says, "First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, because your faith is being proclaimed throughout the whole world. For God, whom I serve in my spirit, in the preaching of the gospel of his Son, is my witness as to how unceasingly I make mention of you, always in my prayers making request, if perhaps now at last, by the will of God, I may succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you, so that I may impart some spiritual gift to you, that you may be established. That is, that I may be encouraged together with you while among you, each of us by the other's faith, both yours and mine." Verse 13, "I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that often I have planned to come to you, and have been prevented so far, so that I may obtain some fruit among you also, even as among the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and the foolish. So for my part, I am eager to preach the gospel to you who are also in Rome. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the righteous man shall live by faith. Now, on one level, these verses coming at the start of the letter, as Paul is really want to do, they really follow his habitual form. There's an expression of thanks. There's an assurance of his prayers. But within this traditional opening, however, Paul really informs them that he has been planning a visit to see them. Not a long stay, not a PCS for the military folks that are out there. This is more of a TDY, if you know the acronyms, or a short-term mission, if you will. He describes why he and his team want to go to Rome and what he plans to do when he's there. So these verses give us, in really a unique way in really all of the New Testament, they give us some insight into Paul's approach to short-term mission. What can we learn about our own mission forays in light of what Paul says to the Romans here? I see 5 principles come out of this text, and that's going to be our outline for this evening. First thing that Paul says right out of the chute is that he's praying for them. We need to be praying for the people that we will visit. Paul was really mighty in prayer for these young churches. We get so many assurances throughout the Bible that he's praying for the young churches either that he had visited or planted or that he would visit. He says here that he unceasingly makes mention of them in his prayers. In Philippians 1, he says that he is always offering prayer with joy in his every prayer for them all. Ephesians 1, he says, I do not cease giving thanks for you while making mention of you in my prayers. Friends, short-term mission is good for your prayer life. You may be praying for your effectiveness, your spouse, your family, your friends. They may be praying for your safety, but in any respect, God is getting many prayers on behalf of those who are going into short-term mission. And just like Paul, when you actually go somewhere and you minister side by side with people, it adds such a layer of understanding to your prayers. You remember vividly the homes that you visited, the church services that you participated in. Perhaps the person who shared very difficult things with you and you prayed with them or you talked with them about their situation. All of these things are awareness that can fuel our intercession on behalf of others. Thank you for taking time to pray here. We wanted to prime the pump, but we really do want people in this church praying as we send our teams out. Some of them are going to very difficult places, and we're crossing cultures, and we're going long distances, and there's plane flights and time on the road, and certainly we want to pray for the fruitfulness of those that are going. Thank you for your prayers. Please continue to pray for those that are going out. A second principle that I think Paul offers here in this passage is to emphasize the relationships. He emphasizes the relationships. In verse 11, he says he's longing to see those who are in Rome. This too was a common sentiment that Paul had toward the churches that he had planted and written to. In Philippians 4:1, he says, therefore, my beloved brethren, whom I long to see, my joy and crown, in this way stand firm in the Lord, my beloved. They are his joy. They are his crown. They are beloved brethren. 1 Thessalonians 3, verse 6, Paul says, Timothy has come to us and brought to us good news of your faith and love, and that you always think kindly of us, longing to see us just as we also long to see you. Very tender and personal. Paul did not plant the church in Rome, and he had never visited it. But in chapter 16, you may have read, he actually greets by name 27 different people in Romans chapter 16. And he calls them things like beloved, my fellow workers, my kinsmen. National capitals tend to draw people from all over. That was true in Rome, and that is true for us here today. It's true in this area, and many of us have come here from other parts and would have friends that would know of you and would have friends here in this capital region. But there were so many that Paul had known and had ended up there in the church at Rome. Short-term mission is a wonderful way to build relationships with people outside of your normal circles. You get connected with people who are vastly different than you as you work and you live and you pray and you eat and you travel and you spend time on buses and planes, and God just gives you a whole crop of new relationships with people that you may not have known very well at all. There are often tears when teams are leaving, prayers for your new brothers and sisters when you return back home. And yes, there is that longing to see them again. I am not going on the Rwanda trip this year, first time I think in 6 or 7 years, and there is that longing to see them. There's a longing to see my brother, Pastor Charles, but fortunately, 3 weeks from today, he's going to be right on this stage preaching right at this moment. Charles Bourget will be here on the 5th of June, so I hope you can come back for that. As I said, over the past decade, 254 people have participated in 18 mission teams in Rwanda. If you take a constant price of $3,500, that's the price for our trip this year, so if you want to help any of the people going, you're welcome to do that. The total amount spent on the people we have sent over there is right around $900,000. That's a lot of money. And we'd been there going for 10 years and was kind of being reflective about it. I was on the phone with Africa New Life's U.S. director, and I said, I put it to him, I said, so if you had the choice, okay, if you had the choice to either take 254 people coming there over 10 years' time, or I could write you a check for $900,000, let's say $1 million, what would you take? Well, he said there was no choice. He said the answer was so clear, he didn't even need to choose. He said overwhelmingly, it was obvious to him that he and they had chosen the better path. He said, think of all the work that's been done. Think of the relationships that have been established. And he said, fundraiser that he is, we've raised way more than $900,000 because of the people that have gone there and because of the links that we've had with Immanuel. You know, it's true. Jesus said in Matthew 6 that where your treasure is, there also your heart will be. And a lot of times when we send people, they just have a tremendous burden and they get involved in helping ministry in those places as well. Last year in Rwanda, I did not return home with the medical team when they came. I stayed on for 4 extra days and came home when the youth team came home. And I had no agenda for those 4 days. People asked me, what are you going to do? And I said, I just want to sit on so-and-so's front porch and drink a Coke. I just want to go and eat lunch with so-and-so. I just want to be here and not be driven at all by a schedule, by an agenda. I want to devote myself to just being with my friends and enjoying the relationships that we have. I've been sensitive to that ever since I attended. I attended an international conference on short-term mission, and one of the speakers they had invited was a Kenyan pastor from a church that apparently had received hundreds of teams over the years. And this pastor came up to the podium and he glared out at the audience and he let there be a real uncomfortable pause. And the first thing he said was, I just want to know one thing. You Americans, are you human beings or human doings? And another uncomfortable pause. There's many times when I really check myself and I think how busy we are and we're going here and we're going here. And Am I really taking time to care about the people that are around me, to encourage them, to pray for them? Are we building in enough time to be devoted to the people and to the relationships that were there? If you get too busy on your mission trip, ask yourself, am I a human being or a human doing? Well, Paul told the Romans that he was praying for them as he prepared for his mission among them. He told them that they were precious to him and that the relationship matters. He also said, though, that he was ready to share his gifts with them. You have to be ready to share your gifts. Paul longed to see his friends in Rome, but he also knew there was a reason for his visit. In verse 11, he says, so that I may impart some spiritual gift. He doesn't specify what that gift is, but a few verses down, he says he wants to obtain some fruit among them, as he has among all of the Gentiles. This calls to mind other places where Paul describes what his mission was, like Ephesians 3, where he says that the reason he was given grace to become a minister was so that he could preach to the Gentiles and bring to light this mystery that had been hidden for all the ages. The parallels with this passage are very close. His goal was that they would be established. And the Greek word here means that they would be strengthened. To strengthen someone or to cause them to become firm or resolute. This is what he wanted for the church. We know that the ultimate goal then of Paul's brief visit would be that non-Christians would hear the gospel. The Greeks, the barbarians, they would all hear the gospel and believe, and that the church would be strengthened. This is the goal of our own short-term missions, is it not? We use the gifts that God has given us, whether it's a knowledge to drill a well, or to lead a vacation Bible school, organize a music concert as our team from the music ministry did last year, conduct a women's program or a medical clinic. In the midst of all that, people hear the gospel and the church is strengthened. I thank God for the very talented people that he has brought to this church and how he uses you when you go out on a mission. We use the gifts that we have. It opens doors. Those knowledge things are appreciated, and it opens wonderful doors for people to hear the gospel and to make connection with us. Fourth principle emerges. Paul wanted to share his gifts with them, but he catches himself, and at the beginning of verse 12, he says that he wants to impart some spiritual gift, that is, and he's not so much correcting himself here as he is expanding that circle on the blessings of what his short-term visit can bring about. And he says, that is, that I may be encouraged together with you while among you, each of us by the other's faith, both yours and mine. Not just imparting his gifts, but receiving. Sharing his gifts, but receiving as well as giving. Now, this mentality is a unique concept in Paul's writing. And perhaps it's because this is one church that he wrote to that he did not plant. He didn't have that he didn't say, you have many tutors in this world, but only one father. He didn't kind of come at it from that. A little more tentative. Some commentators say he was tentative because he's going to ask them for support. In Romans 15, you see that he's going to ask them for help along the way because his real objective is to go through Rome and to get over to Spain, where no one had ever worked. This is a useful principle, though, for us in our own short-term missions and how we conduct them successfully. Friends, it isn't just about the things that you give, but it's also about the things that you receive. Americans almost always go into mission fields where people are more materially poor than we are. Homes are smaller, many have no jobs, people use public transportation, not cars, and we can get the misguided notion that the purpose that we're there is to lift them out of material poverty, or at least to give them a lot of the stuff that we have. We forget that God may very well use the people that we encounter to encourage us and to strengthen our faith. Several of our short-term teams have interacted with the Fickard and Colbert book, When Helping Hurts, and we've learned that there's several dimensions of poverty. Yes, there is material poverty in this world, and it's a good thing when people can rise their families out of it. But Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit. That's a very different dimension of poverty. We looked recently at the church at Laodicea in Revelation 3. And there we see that the church thought that they were rich and had everything. And yet, the scripture says they're poor and wretched. Yet another dimension of poverty. Paul was humble enough to realize that he could be encouraged by the faith of the church in Rome. That it wasn't just him giving to them, that he had much to receive. I think many of us who go on mission are humbled by how much we learn about faith and prayer and joy and acceptance of circumstances by those that we go with. I don't know how many times I've heard people returning or afterwards say, you know, I went to give and to serve, but God had so much more for me. I received a lot more than I gave. And we need the humility to do that as well. Pray for those you visit. Emphasize the relationships. Share your gifts. Receive what God has for you. And finally, preach the gospel. Preach the gospel. The gospel is the central theme of this marvelous letter to the Romans. And it's the key component of the visit Paul is planning to Rome. He ends this paragraph saying that he is under obligation to preach the gospel, and indeed, he is eager to preach it among them. It launches him into the next paragraph, which unveils the whole theme of Romans. I am not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, the Jew first, and also to the Greek. I am under obligation. I am eager. I am not ashamed. This is a wonderful trilogy of statements of Paul's love for the gospel and his eagerness to preach it in their midst. Preaching the gospel was at the core of Paul's life and mission. In the first verse of chapter 1 of Romans, he says that he's a bondservant of Jesus. He's called as apostle. He is set apart for the gospel of God. Friends, when we look for opportunities for short-term mission service, we look for places where our efforts will result in people hearing the gospel and having a chance for the church to be strengthened by gospel ministry. Often missions projects involve compassion projects and compassion involvement in communities and providing compassionate service for needy people. And that's okay. Jesus also had ministry of healing amidst the preaching. The world, however, is often happy to receive the church's social ministry, but it's not so happy to receive its exclusive message that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one comes to the Father except through him. And a lot of times there's pressure to tone down the message and keep giving the services, but just don't talk so much about your Jesus. Whether it's across the street or around the world, we need to resist anything that would keep us from making the gospel the emphasis of our mission endeavors. And at the same time, we should look for opportunities where God is blessing, where people are responding. And we certainly have that. Many of our missionaries are seeing great fruit on their mission fields. We met just this morning with a wonderful pastor from Cuba. And they have teams that come, and all they do while they're there is share the gospel. They go into homes, they sit down, and they share the gospel. And he said, he had a little twinkle in his eye. He said, I think this is Cuba's time because we're seeing 80 to 90% of the homes responding. And we put people from the church on these teams, and they come and they join our churches. He says, I think this is a season for Cuba. So guess where we're thinking about maybe sending a team next year? These are places where God is bearing much fruit, and we're able to have the liberty to preach the gospel. Longing to see, that's the relationships. Eager to preach, that's the center of the message. Friends, I'm so happy that these are things that are important to you all. I know that these things are true for those that we're sending out. I know that you and your family and your friends will be praying, and I know God will use your gifts to open doors, to bless people, and to give an opening for the gospel. You're going to learn much about yourself and the Christian world off of this corner, and you're probably going to echo the sentiment of so many others who have said, I went to serve and give, but I received so much more in return. That's God's way of building up his church. The church there, the church here, connected in mission, loving one another, understanding each other deeper, praying for each other, sharing their gifts, and receiving all that God has for them. It's a marvelous plan. It seemed to work for Paul. It seems to work for us. And I'm grateful to God for these principles which help guide our service. Let's look to him in prayer. Lord, we say to you be the glory. Our desire in going to all these places, Montana, Nicaragua, Ecuador, all over the world, Lord, is really to lift up your name. We do pray you would open the door and allow us to preach your gospel, to grow deeper, Lord, in knowledge and love for your people that are in that place, to share the things that you've given us and put on our hearts and the skills that you've enabled us to have. But Father, to help us to open our hearts as well and to receive all that you have for us. What a joy it is, Lord. Thank you for calling us to be a church that's involved in taking your gospel and the love of Jesus Christ to strengthen the church and to reach unbelievers to the ends of the earth.
You have been listening to Immanuel. You can find more resources like this at ibcva.com. Here is a parting word from Pastor Jesse.
If you have any questions about what you heard today, or if you want to learn more about what it means to follow Christ, please visit our church website, ibcva.com. If you're not a member of a local church and you live in the Washington, D.C. area, we'd love to have you worship with us here at Immanuel. We're located in Northern Virginia, and for more information about when and where we worship, check out our church website. I hope to personally meet you this Sunday after our service. But no matter where you live, it's our hope that everyone who uses this resource is involved in their own local church. Now may God bless you this week as you seek Jesus constantly, serve the Lord faithfully, and share the gospel boldly.